Hello, Drafting 10 students, and welcome to our next unit, which is sectional drawings. Sectional drawings are pretty closely related to orthographic drawings because they're only drawn from 90-degree angles. So you're either looking at the object from the front or from the end view, sometimes from the top view, but we like to try to eliminate one of those views and use the front view to give us a bit more information about what's going on inside of an object. So when we're talking about sectional drawings, we're talking about a drawing where we use an imaginary saw, just imagine a band saw from your construction and carpentry class, if you've had one, where you cut right through the middle of a wood block, and then you can see what's inside of it. So there's inside features like maybe there's holes for drilling, or there could be some sort of gap in the middle of the object or a slot, and it just gives you a better idea about what's going on the inside. The four most common sectional views, by the way, these notes are available on the website. The four most common sectional views, the ones we're going to use in this course, are a full sectional, a half sectional, offset, and aligned sectionals. And they all have sort of a special purpose based on the shape of the object that you're trying to draw. So what are they? I've already explained it. It's an imaginary knife is used to make a cut line so that we can see what's inside. They give us a better idea about how things are assembled and mostly the inner details and features of the parts. And because we can reduce one of our views in our typical orthographic 3-view drawing, it can lead to less clutter inside of our document as well. All right, so let's start with a full sectional view. And a full sectional view, it's actually a sort of a bit of a, maybe confusing name because it's really half of the object. So a full sectional means you've cut it in half. So a full is really a half, if you get what I'm saying there. So if we look at this object here, and you can see it's got this rectangular slot drilled through the middle. It's got some counterbore holes. If we were to cut this in line, or cut this down the center line along its length, split it in half, it would look something like this. We're going to have material here, solid material, but you get a really good idea about what that gap in the middle looks like, as well as what these counterbore bolt holes look like. Your final view is not going to be at an angle like this. This is actually an isometric representation. Yours is going to look more like your orthographic drawings, where you're going to be looking at it from the front side. So this is actually going to be flat across the page. This is just a demonstration to show you what we're doing when we are creating a visual model for a section view. So a full section is always cut it right in half. And then what you're going to do is you're going to represent it with the front orthographic view. So you see, you just took this object, turned it sideways, and you get a very good idea as to what these counterbored holes look like, what that slot looks like, and what is solid material, whatever that material may be. When you're doing a sectional view, you use something called a hatch. And basically a hatch is just filling in certain spaces with lines or a pattern or a color to indicate that it's solid material and to differentiate it from gaps in the object made by holes or slots or whatever internal features there are. So those lines are called section lines, but we use the hatch tool in order to complete that. So there's an example of a full sectional drawing. We can also do it with round or cylindrical parts. In this case, we usually draw both a front view, so you can see a full front view of the object, and then we would include a section view right beside it. For something like this, we would probably include a top view, because the end view doesn't tell you much on this one, it's so narrow. So we would probably include a top view, not section, just the full object, and then underneath it, we'll have the front view, which is sectioned. Whereas with one of these objects, something like this, we would have a front view that's not sectioned, just the way you would normally draw it, and then we're going to have a sectioned end view, sorry. So we've got the front view, and then the end view would be on the right side, and it's basically just turning this object so the nose is pointed this way, and then it would look like that. So this full section drawing would actually have the full version, non-sectioned, right beside it. So you'd have a front view and an end view. So again, full sectional, we cut the object in half, okay, this time vertically because we want to represent it pointing this way. So we cut it vertically, and then what we end up seeing is we get a very good look at these bore holes, we get a look at the keyway, okay, which is just, basically it's just a little area that you can stick a rectangular metal piece in so that this thing doesn't spin. Okay. It's not supposed to spin, it's supposed to fit onto some sort of shaft and turn with the shaft. So that's what that little keyway is for. In any case, we get a good look at it there. We get a good look at this internal bore. Okay. And then on the other side of, or the bottom side of the object, it's the same as the top. So it's a full sectional. It's just a different looking object. We don't include hidden lines in our sectional drawings, okay, unless they actually help us understand something, you know, more complex. So even in the front view, you're going to continue to put in your center lines, and you're going to continue to draw all the features correctly, but you're not going to have to include your hidden lines, because the whole point of the section view is it's going to give us an idea about what some of those hidden areas look like, and we don't want to clutter our drawings too much. Okay, so this would be you know, a final version. You notice that we've got the front view, and then we've got the end view being sectioned. The front view is drawn the way you would normally draw it, but there's no hidden lines or anything like that. All you see is center marks for the circles, and obviously all the measurements go straight across into your sectioned version, your full section version. So that's a full sectional. When we are dealing with certain features in sectional drawings, it's important that we draw them and hatch them properly, otherwise it can get confusing. So for this instance right here, I've got this bracket piece, and we just have to imagine that we cut that right in half, right through the middle of this rib in the middle. The rib is a triangular section here. It's usually put there to just give the object strength, so this piece doesn't bend back over or this piece doesn't bend down. So things like that, we don't actually want to crosshatch, because if we crosshatch them, we give a false representation of what the object actually looks like. So I kind of got the X in the way here, but what is under the X is we've got this cross section. We've got the cross section of the rib is completely crosshatched and filled with those diagonal lines. Okay. Now, what that would indicate to someone who didn't see this portion over here, what if they just saw the half of this object that looked like this, so this is the same as that, they might think that the object looks like this. So what it ignores is the fact that that rib is only in the middle and that there's two more holes here, because when you cut it down the middle, you actually don't see those two holes. So if you fill in or hatch that section of the rib, it gives you a false sense of what the object actually looks like. So this is not what we wanted to represent. This is what we want to represent. And the way that we're going to make that happen is that because this is a rib, we are not going to fill in the area of the rib with these diagonal section lines. We're going to leave that blank. That allows us to put in these holes here to better represent the object and not give the impression that it is one, you know, solid piece of metal in this triangular ribbed portion. So that would be the correct sectioned view for the object, to make sure that whoever's rating it understands that it looks like this and not like that. So generally, you will not color in or hatch webs or ribs. Sometimes they're called webs. Okay. Another example here of how you might get a false interpretation of what the object is if we look at this wheel and I cut it straight down the middle, I'm cutting through this middle spoke. So this spoke is going to be treated like a web. If I were to cut this in half, like this, and just give it to somebody from the front view, they might think that this is solid metal all the way around and not have these little cutouts and these ribs. So in order to give a better idea of what this object would actually look like, we are not going to section or hatch the areas that represent these holes. We're just going to leave them blank so that we give a better representation of the object. Now this view and this view are not enough anyway. You're going to need a front view, but it creates a little bit more clarity if you have a front view of this and the section view like that, to make it clear that there are these open areas between the spokes. It's not just solid metal all the way around, or wood, or whatever the material is. All right, the next type of sectional, the second of the four, is called a half sectional, which again is a little bit weird because you're actually going to see a quarter of the object. You're seeing half of a half. So this is it cut in half, that's a full sectional. And then if we just show the top half of the object, and usually it is the top half, as being sectioned, that's a half sectional. So the bottom of the object, whatever it is going to look like just exactly what it would look like if you looked at the object from the end view. Right? No hidden lines. You're just going to see what you would see from the end view, and then the top half is going to have the sectioned version where you're going to see these holes, you're going to see what's solid material, and you're going to see, and this is a bore, so that's why it's not colored in. And you always have to have a line through it, your center line, so that it's clear, that this is sort of the halfway point. This is what it looks like from the outside, this is what it looks like from the inside. So this object here in a half sectional, okay, it's you're going to see the front view, and then you're going to see this view right beside it on the right side, where you can see the outside of the object, and then you can see the inside of the object. And sometimes this gives us a better idea of what the end object is. You're usually only going to see half sectional views for things that are cylindrical and rounded. You're not going to see that for rectangular objects. So that's a half section. Okay, here's another sort of visual. We've got a top view on this one. I would probably not organize it like this. I would probably have this as a front view here, and then I would have this turned up with the nose pointing. So I usually go front view, end view, as opposed to top and looking down. But this is a quarter of this sliced out of this object, and then what it would look like is you've got the outside portion here. So this is what it would look like from the outside of the object, looking at it from from any one of these angles that's not straight up or straight down. And then the other half of the object is what it looks like on the inside. So there's a little slot here at the very end. You can tell by a hidden line there. There it is right there. There's a little, some sort of, sort of inset counter bore of some type. And then you've got a bolt hole right there. Now they have included some hidden lines, on the top drawing here. I would not do that on the front view. I usually omit all hidden lines on section drawings for clarity and just to keep things nice and clean. One thing I haven't discussed yet is a cut line. So a cut line is what you would draw on the front view of whatever object it is that indicates the section that I've cut out in order to complete the sectional drawing. So in the case of a half section, well, let's start with a full section. In the case of a full section, if you're drawing the front view, right here, what you would do is you would have a thicker line going right through the middle of the object to indicate that it's a cut line and not a center line. Yes, it will coincide with this vertical center line, but a thicker line, and it usually has arrowheads on it, indicates this is a section view and this is where I cut with my imaginary bandsaw. And so it's very, very straightforward for a full sectional. It's just right down the middle. However, for a half sectional, you're cutting out a quarter of the object. So depending on, on your front view, and if you drew the end view over here, which is what I would normally do, you're going to want to indicate it by drawing that thicker line to the middle and then out the side. So it indicates that you're basically cutting away a quarter of this object so that you can show what's inside. So you can see it here. They've done it on the bottom. It's got an arrowhead. It's a thicker line, so it's pretty obvious. And sometimes they do them dashed as well. I usually just use a nice thick line to indicate where that cut is. Section type number 3 is an offset sectional. Sometimes we have objects that have bolt holes or features that are not necessarily nicely lined up in the middle. If I were to cut this object dead in half, doing a full sectional, this is what it's going to look like, and I'm going to miss out on all these bolt holes. So it's not a very good way of representing the object. In this case, what we're going to do is called an offset sectional, where we're going to go through using only straight lines and 90-degree angles, okay, no curves or anything like that. We're going to make a cutting plane that goes through the most important features of the object. So we're going to indicate on our either front view or top view where our cut line is going, and then we're going to represent it down below as if our bandsaw went along that path. And this way I can get a good look at this hole, and then you can see the two center holes, and you can also see this one on the end. Would it have mattered if I'd have gone through the middle and up through this one instead of going down through this one? No, not at all. These holes are lined up, so you can go down or you could go up. It doesn't matter, they're lined up. So that's an offset sectional. Typically with an offset sectional, You're going to do it with more rectangular objects, rectilinear objects, and you're going to have a top view and the front view. So you're going to see top view, front view more often for rectangular objects, and you're going to see front view, end view more often for those cylindrical objects or circular objects. So that's the offset. That's the offset version. And then our last one is what's known as an aligned sectional. You don't see these very often. The reason we do aligned sectionals is sometimes we have triangular objects, and it's usually 4 triangular objects. A triangular object, if we were to cut this right down the middle, all the way down the middle, and represent it as a full sectional, this is what it would look like, right? The object only goes down here. So it would look like this. We would have a hatched metal section here, a hole, more metal. Then we've got, you know, a center cut with a whole bunch of hidden lines for these, or a whole bunch of lines for these little keyways here. And then we've got solid metal. But this does not do a very good job of representing this. It kind of ignores the fact that it's triangular and that we've got holes at the bottom and that these keyways are not straight up and down. They're actually on an angle. So a better way to represent that is what's known as an aligned sectional. An aligned sectional with a triangular object, usually you'll start right at the top, you'll draw your cutting line to the middle, and then out through one of the spokes to indicate that I'm going to take this and show you these features down here in a better way. Now, how do we do that appropriately? If I try to include these details over here, it's outside the object and it's going to cause us problems. What you do is you kind of imagine in an imaginary fashion, you take this one section and you swing the whole thing so it's straight down. So that's what these little curved lines are for. You'll notice the cutting line goes to the middle and then it goes out here, and then you've got an arrow that sort of indicates an arc down to the bottom. So it's basically you're just pretending to take this piece of metal and bending it down so that it's vertical, it's up and down. And then you just trace everything across to the other side. So this would rotate down, and then when you bring it over to your end view, it becomes there. The outside of the hole here, you bring it down on that arc, hit the center line, and then you get to there, and so on and so forth. So you line this up, and it actually, the section view looks more like a full section view. You know, it looks more like this. But because you've indicated with your cut line and this little rounded section here that it's an aligned sectional, anybody who's in the industry or is doing this in post-secondary education will know that the fact that it's called, or that the cut line is there, means that it's an aligned sectional, which means this object down here is sort of a fake depth. It's just here to show us the bolt hole and the other features at the bottom of the object without, cluttering it all into this little space and giving a false idea of what this thing actually looks like. So that's an aligned sectional, probably the least commonly used of the 4. Offset would be, I think I've ordered them in what I would consider the order of most used to least used, most being fulls, then halves, then offset, and then aligned. So we're going to get some practice with these, but I'm just going to flick over to my AutoCAD and just give a quick look at one that I've already saved. So free up internet there. Yeah, saving it. Sectional drawings. Okay, something weird's going on there. I've got a jig body, which is one of our, I believe, our practice drawings. And if I open this up, you will see an example of an offset sectional. So you'll note, ignore the second one, that's just what I use for marking. Note that this object has several features that are not dead center. Okay, this rib or web is dead center, this circle is dead center, but we have bores here and here that are not on the center line. So by going in through that, up through the middle, down through that hole, up through the middle hole, and the same thing mirrored on the other side, I'm indicating that this is an offset sectional, and then I have represented all of these features on the version below. So this kind of looks like a full sectional, but my cutting line tells me that this is an offset sectional. So this is indicate where the ribs are. Notice I didn't crosshatch inside the ribs. So I know where the ribs are, I know where the holes are, I know what the counterbore looks like, and it gives me a better idea of what the object is. I don't have arrowheads on my cutting line. I have just made it a thicker line to indicate that it's a cutting line, and there's no problem there. So our next lesson, we're actually going to do a couple of these. We'll do a full section and a half section, and we'll just help you keep moving forward.